Welcome to RECO12. My name is Justin, and I am an addict. I've been actively working the steps in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013, and am grateful to be sober one day at a time thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts. RECO12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction and all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcohol, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, just to name a few. Each Friday at noon Central Time, we hold a live lunch hour speaker meeting with a recovering addict from anywhere on earth, pertaining to any or no faith tradition and with any background, who shares their experience, strength, and hope on a specified recovery topic of their choice. They share for 20 to 25 minutes on that topic, and then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. Before I introduce our guest speaker for today, I want to make a quick announcement about plans for RECO12 in the next, starting about a little over a month from now. Beginning in March 4th, 2022, we will start a 12-week series on each of the 12 steps of recovery. I am searching for people who are absolutely passionate about one of the 12 steps and come from any and all fellowships of recovery and would like to share with us their experience, strength, and hope on that step. The basic format will be similar to what we're doing right now, 20 to 25 minutes of a share, and then 20 to 25 minutes of Q&A on that step that the speaker will be speaking about. If you or someone in your fellowship is passionate about one of the steps and just seems to share about a particular step and the power of that step in their life, please consider reaching out to me at RECO12pod@gmail.com, and we will discuss it and get it scheduled. We have several speakers spoken, several of the steps already spoken for already, but we still need several more. So get in quickly if you'd like to be one of those guest speakers. Donations and reviews are greatly appreciated, and details on doing that will be in the chat of the live meeting or in the show notes of the podcast. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our speaker for today's 85th RECO12 meeting, Dara L, whose topic is 2 step ones before 1 step 2. Now, here's a little bit about Dara as she sent it over to me. Dara L is a recovered anorexic, bulimic, compulsive overeater, sex and love addict, and a grateful member of OA and SLAA. She has hit many spectacular bottoms in her lifetime and has finally found recovery through surrendering all aspects of her addictions. Her story offers a powerful example of how not all addicts are served by treating their addictions in the order that they kill you. In her case, it was treating 2 addictions simultaneously that enabled her to discover the unconditional love of a higher power. Dara, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Justin. God, Goddess, Godex, Spirit of light and love, whatever is up there, out there, in me and in all others, please give me the strength and the courage to tell the truth about myself and my disease, that my story may help someone else to recover from a hopeless state of mind and of body. Amen. So my name is Dara L. I'm a recovered anorexic, bulimic, compulsive overeater, and sex and love addict. And I think it's important to introduce my conception of a power greater than myself before I introduce myself, because without that and without access to that, my story would have ended a long time ago. It would have ended with death and destruction, which is where I was headed. And so I'll just share, a little bit about kind of what my life was like prior to really taking myself on and surrendering the behaviors that were killing me and that were getting in the way of my being able to show up in the world. So Justin mentioned that I'm a recovered anorexic, bulimic, and compulsive overeater. And what that looked like for me was it looked like 18 long-term treatment facilities. I was institutionalized many, many times in my teens and 20s. I'm 38 years old now. And then I got into OA, and I thought food was my problem. I thought my compulsive eating, my anorexia, my bulimia, I thought that was the problem. And if I could just get a handle on that, then I would be okay. And then I would be able to figure out, all this life stuff, because life was overwhelming to me. But I thought life was overwhelming to me because of the way I ate. I didn't realize that I ate the way that I did because life was overwhelming to me. And I think, it might sound like a distinction without a difference, but it is incredibly different, because what I thought would happen is that if I just stopped binging and purging and starving and overexercising and taking laxatives and killing myself with food, I thought that, oh, well, great, then, my life will get better. But what happened was I would stop doing those things, and my inner life would get more and more unmanageable, regardless of whether my external life got better. Because my real problem as an addict is that I don't know how to live in a godless universe. I don't know how to live without access to a power greater than myself. And for a long time, the power greater than myself was food, and it was effective. It took the edge off of my emotions, my unstable inner condition, and my feeling of life sucks and then you die. I think I had two kind of chronic states, which was homicidal or suicidal. And depending on where you caught me, I was one or the other. And so anyways, why do I share about that? Because what happened for me was, and this talk is about, taking step ones before step two. So what happened for me was I would stop the eating disorder behavior. I would go into treatment, or I would go into OA or whatever it was, and I would stop the things that were killing me. I would stop ingesting the foods that, once I started, I couldn't stop eating them. And once I stopped, my mind kept leading me back to them. So I would stop that. And then I had this secret belief, which is, okay, if I just stop killing myself with food, then I'm going to meet the love of my life and I'll be happy forever, and that was my belief. And so I would stop the bulimia. I would, work the steps, I'd get a sponsor, I'd do all the things. And if that didn't happen, if I didn't meet that person that filled the hole in my soul, then I would be like, F this, and I'm out. And so my pattern, in OA, which, for a long time was my primary and or my only fellowship. And now I consider myself to be like 50-50, OA and SLAA. But for a long time, that was what I did. And so I had 2 years of abstinence in OA where I did not binge, I did not purge, I did not starve myself. I was sponsoring people, but I was miserable. I would leave a meeting, an OA meeting, and I think I was in a relationship, and I would go cheat on the person I was with, or I would go on these, I would go on vacation and I would sleep with whoever would have me. I would just act out in my sex and love addiction because I still had that hole. I still had that feeling of emptiness, and it was really painful for me. And I think anyone who's in multiple fellowships and is acting out in one and not acting out in another kind of knows that pain of feeling very distant and separate from a God of their understanding in one area, and yet seeing, all these benefits and these miracles happen, both in my life, they were happening, and in the lives of the people around me. And so it was for me, what happened was I had 2 years of abstinence in OA. Was like, I'm still not happy on the inside. I still haven't met the love of my life. I'm done with this. And I left and I relapsed into the bulimia, and I went back to OA, and I had 2 more years of abstinence and was sponsoring and doing all these things. And I left and I relapsed, same thing. Cause I was like, I'm only in this to meet the love of my life. And if that's not happening, then this is pointless, And then I came back to OA after that relapse. I had 2 more years of abstinence. I did the same thing, right? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I did the same thing. So after 2 years of abstinence again in OA, I was like, this isn't working. And I left. And the thing is, this disease, my disease of spiritual separation and ego, unchecked ego and a feeling of alienation and a feeling of not feeling good enough and, terminal uniqueness, all those things. It's so cunning and baffling, and it's so insidious. And what happened for me was I wasn't able to make a correlation between leaving OA and relapsing into bulimia because it took me 3 years to go back to using eating disorder symptoms. So I had 5 years of not binging or purging or starving before I relapsed a year and actually, no, I guess 2.5 years now, because I have a year recovered in both OA and SLAA. But what happened for me was, and I should say, when I first came into OA, I had nothing. My life was really empty. I mean, as you can imagine, if someone's been in treatment 18 different times, like I had a $300 a day food habit as a bulimic. So like I had no money, I was in and out of treatment. I was incapable of kind of keeping relationships. So I had zero. And I'm a big book thumper. And there's, the story of Jim, the story of the jaywalker, and the story of Fred in the big book. And I came in like Jim, right? Like had zero, my life sucked. Everything was bad. Everything was wrong. And then, thanks to the fellowship, thanks to, the love and support of the people around me, and thanks to like a fledgling relationship with God, I'd really been able to build a pretty amazing from the outside life. But because I only was dealing with the food addiction and those problems, inside I still felt empty. And so why I'm sharing that is because prior to my last relapse, what happened was I was in the best shape of my life. I had not acted out in my eating disorder for a long time. I hadn't been going to OA meetings for like 3 years, but I didn't think I needed them. I didn't think I needed any sort of spirituality. I was doing work looked great. It was the story of Fred, like everything was fine, except what happened for me was a couple weeks before I relapsed, one of my really good friends, his daughter committed suicide. And when he called me to sort of tell me about it, and I ended up being a support person for him, what I thought immediately was, I wish I had the courage to do what she did. I wish I had the courage to do what his daughter did. And it was because I wasn't in a love relationship. I was dating at the time. I was compulsively dating. I was obsessively dating. I was trying to find someone who was going to fill the hole in my soul, and it wasn't working. And I just felt like my life was meaningless. Like everything that was good felt like nothing because I couldn't find a love relationship. And I will tell you that I've been in many, many love relationships, and none of them have filled the void. So even if I had been with someone, it wouldn't have made a difference. It was just that I felt empty because I had no connection with God. And I also didn't understand powerlessness. I didn't understand what my problem was. And so I picked up the bulimia again. And I'm so grateful that I did, because without that, I wouldn't have realized that actually food was not my problem. It was the solution to my problem, which is me, as an untreated addict. I'm in pain always if I'm not like threading God through my life, through all areas of my life. And in the past, I'd only been willing to have a relationship with God insofar as it related to my food stuff, maybe how I dealt with money and people a little bit, but stay out of my love life, God, I got this thing covered, was my MO. And so when I came back into this fellowship, I knew at that time that I had to make an unconditional commitment to surrender, and an unconditional commitment to letting God be the guiding force in my life. And I will say, because I was so sick at the time, and I'd been out of the 12-step rooms for a long time, and I thought that I'd been doing better, on my own with willpower. And I thought the 12 steps were like real. I mean, I really poo-pooed them, and I thought like they were horrible and for idiots. I mean, I had all these preconceptions because it hadn't worked for me before, because I wasn't willing to admit the extent of my sickness. Every 5th step I've ever done in OA, a sponsor has said to me, you really need to look at your sex and love addiction. I talk about the dangerous aspects of the eating disorder, but my sex and love addiction took me to some really, really dangerous places, being in abusive relationships, sleeping with people I didn't know, putting myself in very dangerous situations, just like doing whatever I could in order to feel wanted and loved and validated and to escape, you know? And so the reason I'm saying all of that is because when I came back in this time around, I really had to be led by God. I had to have a step 2 experience, even before I had a step 1 experience. And so what that looked like for me was, I started writing what I now know to be two-way prayer. I didn't have the language for that at the time, but I started kind of writing to God, and I didn't even believe in God. And today I'm just in love with God, and I believe God's in love with me. But I started like writing these letters to what I would have said at the time was my higher self, but I now know to be my inner God consciousness. And in these letters, I was like, tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. You know, I've tried everything and I'm killing myself and I don't know what to do. And I got like loud and clear, go back to OA, with like just loud and clear. But I am a defiant, you know, alcoholics, addicts, we're defiant. Though, you know, I usually don't think so. I am a defiant person. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do 12 steps light, because like I don't really want to go into a food fellowship where they're going to talk to me about the allergy of the body, and I'm going to have to put down the things that are killing my body. So I like went to a different 12-step fellowship having to do with anorexia and bulimia that like really had never worked for me in the past. And I went there and like stayed there for about 2 weeks, and I was not getting better. And then I went back to God and I was like, okay, like tell me what to do. I'm willing to do anything, you know? And God was like, go back to OA. And I was like, I don't know about that. So I went to this other, 12-step fellowship where like they really don't stress anything to do with the allergy of the body or the physical manifestation of the disease. And they didn't talk about the doctor's opinion. And it was like, well, as long as your symptoms are getting a little bit better, like then you're good. And for someone like me, that's like telling an alcoholic to drink 1 beer a day. Like even if I could do it, it would not be satisfying, you know? So yeah. And then, the third time was the charm. I went back and God was like, listen, get your butt to an OA meeting. And I did, and thank God I called like 23 people from OA, the day before getting back to a meeting. Mind you, I was binging and purging the whole time, but I was like, I'm just going to do it. And I found people who were willing to love and support me. And around that same time, I knew that dating was killing me. I was trying to date. I was trying to like get into a relationship. And I just thought, okay, I cannot do that. Like I cannot be pursuing love of myself and love of someone else at the same time. Not when I hate myself as much as I do, not when I'm as empty on the inside as I am. And so I was willing to put what I now know to be bottom lines. I was willing to really say, okay, these are the things I cannot do. And at that time I couldn't be in any capacity dating or seeking any sort of validation outside of myself, just as I couldn't be eating, there's certain foods that I cannot put in my body, certain behaviors that I cannot do. And so I put all of that down at the same time. And January 14th, 2021 was my sobriety date, both in OA and SLAA. And I came into OA first, and I got a sponsor, and I was working the steps quickly because I believe that is really like how I get inoculated and how I get safe and protected, internally, so that I'm not triggered by the external world anymore. And as we were working the steps, we got to step 5. And I know you're not supposed to take another person's inventory, but thankfully my sponsor was inspired by God. And I gave her my step 5, and I had already, stopped dating, put down, closed all the dating apps, like refused to talk to anyone I'd ever been with and whatnot. But my sponsor at that time, she said, I know I'm probably not supposed to tell you this, but you're a sex and love addict. And if you don't get help with that, you are never going to stay recovered in OA, like ever, ever, ever. And I took a deep breath and I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you so much. That was the word of God. And I found a sponsor in SLAA and worked the steps quickly in that program as well. And for me, like the great joy of my life, it was so weird. I thought I needed the love of someone else in order to love myself. And it turns out I was both wrong and right about that, because I did I needed God to love me before I could really learn to love myself. But today I do, which is amazing, because not for nothing, but like I had 175 amends to make. Like I was not a very lovable person. And this is after having recovered a number of times in programs. So like I am a train wreck. Loving me is hard to do when I'm an untreated addict. But the fact that I can look myself in my own eyes in the mirror today and feel really whole and complete, and Like, I don't have to chase anyone else, right? Like, I mean, sometimes I chase God, but I feel like that's okay because God's right there and just willing and able to open it's their loving arms to me and just envelop me. And so for me, step one, right? We were talking a little bit about step one, and what is that? We admitted we were, we were powerless over blank, whatever the blank is, dash, that our lives have become unmanageable. And I never understood the second part of step one. And so my life is always going to be unmanageable as an addict. And I think as a human, right, my life is always going to be unmanageable by me. And what that means to me today is that if I'm not aligning my will and my life to this source that loves me and cares deeply about me, I'm going to feel really restless on the inside. I'm going to feel really depressed and alone and spiritually bankrupt. And when I feel that way, I only have two options. One is to reach for the things that, well, really one option, it's to reach for the things that work, right? And in the past, for me, the things that worked were bulimia or certain food items. And it was getting validation from people outside of myself. It was sleeping with, people. It was trying to get into a relationship. I mean, I've cheated on every person I've ever been in a relationship with because I just wanted to be wanted in such a way that it like filled the void inside of me. And for me, that hasn't happened without having a God experience and that coming to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I don't think I had problems believing that I could be sane around food because I had long stretches of recovery over my lifetime. But what I really didn't believe was that I could be restored to a state of wholeness around relationships, especially romantic relationships. Like my first ever addiction, I think, was love addiction to my mother, and believing that she was going to be my everything and believing that I could be her everything. And so for me, even though on the surface, I thought for a long time that the bulimia was the thing that was the real root of my addiction, I've come to realize that actually, if I don't acknowledge that I'm a double addict, with a body that is abnormal when it comes to relationships and a mind that's abnormal when it comes to relationships and that's abnormal when it comes to food, if I don't realize and treat the severity of that simultaneously, then, it's not going to work for me. It's not going to stick. And the reason I know that is because I have a history of being, recovered in one program and being insane in another and continuing to act out and feeling emptier and emptier and sadder and not understanding why, and being in a 12-step room with people who around me, seeing all the miracles and seeing the miracles in my own life and still feeling empty on the inside, and so for me, I really needed to be willing to treat both of my addictions at the same time, because what I wanted, what I was really craving all this time was a relationship with God. And I couldn't find that relationship when I was blocked. And for me, the two things that I've identified so far that are guaranteed to block me from God are trying to find another human being who is going to worship me or who I can worship, or, worshiping at the altar of food and then praying to the porcelain gods, which is kind of like how I describe bulimia. And so I was going to be blocked, from God if I wasn't letting go of those things. And I really think like that's what the steps are. It's a journey to get unblocked from the God consciousness within. And I use the word God a lot. But that's just the language and the verbiage that speaks to me. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a foundational text of all the 12-step programs, really talks, it does use the word God a lot, but it also describes a power greater than ourselves. And I think for me, that's what this is about. It doesn't have to look any particular way. I don't even have to really understand that power. I just have to know that for me as an addict, when I make myself the power that I turn to, it gets really lonely and I get really afraid and I get very self-obsessed and I start to manipulate myself and others, and it never works well. And then I have to turn to something to take the edge off and to take that pain away. And either it's going to be God or some power greater than myself, or, for me, it's going to be people or it's going to be food. So, I don't really believe in giving suggestions, but I will say that my experience tells me that if I'm not working this program and feeling truly and completely free, it's because there's something blocking me from God. And so my invitation is to anyone who's listening to this, who might be working, a 12-step program. If you're not feeling the promises, my invitation and what has worked for me is to look at what else could be blocking me from God. And because I'm a highly ego-driven person, a really slow learner, it took me relapsing 4 times into bulimia in order to be willing to let go of the sex and love addiction. But I know that I was invited every single time I went through the steps to look at that and to be willing to let that go. And thankfully, the disease led me to act out in the bulimia enough times that I was willing to do that, because without that, I think even if I had total food freedom, without the freedom from the sex and love addiction, my life was really empty anyway. And so my invitation to those listening and to myself is to continue to look for do I have that authentic love relationship with a power greater than myself? Do I feel connected to people? Do I feel like I can look myself in my own eyes in the mirror and actually like the person looking back at me? Do I honor my soul? Are my choices in line with my ideals? And if that's not the case, keep seeking, keep searching. The addicts are searchers. And I think, it's can we be willing to do whatever it takes to get unblocked from being the people that we were created to be? And for me, that's been a really fun and interesting journey. And it hasn't looked at all like what I thought it would look like. But I'm excited to see where it goes next. And I think with that, I'll pass and then just open it up to questions. And thanks so much for letting me be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dara. I really appreciate your honesty, your vulnerability, and your shares. And I like the way that you came at the topic of 2-step ones before 1-step 2, and how you really dug into that. Thank you so much. It helped open up my eyes and mind to a lot of things in my own life. A reminder to our live audience that if you have questions for Dara, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other, and we'll get to those as we go along here. I've also written down several questions that came to my mind as you shared. But before we get to those, do you mind taking 60 seconds or less and just kind of talking about the fellowships you attend, and specifically how those help you in your own life?
Sure. So I'm a very grateful and active member of both OA and SLAA, which stands for Overeaters Anonymous and Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. I'm part of a co-creation team for an SLAA meeting that we're currently about to launch, where we really emphasize the big book, and the OA meetings that I attend really emphasize the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps. And I would say that in addition to those meetings, I have a lot of really vibrant friendships that I utilize. I do a ton of step 10s with people in the program. And then I sponsor someone in OA and I sponsor another person in SLAA, because for me, that is really where I get to remember. I mean, the ism, right? Whatever it is, alcoholism, I've heard that it stands for incredibly short memory. And despite the fact that I am someone who has acted out in incredible and spectacular ways, I forget that if I'm not working one-on-one with people about, and really confronting the nature of my addiction through them. And then I also have a sponsor in OA and a sponsor in SLAA. So I would say that, I utilize the fellowship on a daily basis, both fellowships, and they've saved my life and allowed me to show up for things that I was never able to show up for without the love of people or, God with skin on.
Awesome. Thank you. And that was actually the title of last week's speaker meeting, God with Skin On. So awesome that you brought that back to there. Thank you. You just mentioned now that you do a lot of step 10s with people. I love having that experience of doing that, but I was wondering if you could maybe with me, go through an example of what that looks like to do a step 10 with somebody there.
Oh, yeah, 1000%. Oh, I love that. Okay. So I just want to caveat this by saying that in the big book, it says, we watch for where we're selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid. And then, we tell someone kind of what happened. We call them, we tell them what's going on. And then, we immediately turn our thoughts and our attention to someone that we could help. Right. So that's the big book formula. I feel like I've kind of put my own spin on it, but it works for me. And so I do my step 10s like a mini step 4. So like, for example, yesterday, I was very annoyed because someone asked me to do something, Justin, and I said no, but I was annoyed that they asked me to do it because I didn't want to have to say no. So that's an example, right, of a step 10able situation. Like I want people to like me. I don't like to say no. I want people to know better than to ask me to do stuff like that isn't my job. And so I called someone and I said, okay, can I do a step 10? And she said, sure. And I said, all right, so I'm resentful at this person because they asked me to do something. I didn't like that because then I felt like a bad person because I had to say no. And so it affects my self-esteem, it affects my ambitions, it affects my personal relations, and there was fear involved. Where am I selfish? I expect other people to know my boundaries and to, set them for me so that I never have to be perceived, as anything other than perfect. Where am I dishonest? I'm dishonest because people aren't mind readers and this person didn't do anything wrong by asking. And actually, God is trying to stretch me into being a person who can say what I mean and mean what I say, right? And so it was like an opportunity for me. Where am I self-seeking? I'm self-seeking because I want everyone to like me all the time. I don't want to be human. I don't want to have limitations. Where am I afraid? Because I am afraid that if I say no to someone, then they won't like me and then no one will like me. And then it means that I'm going to end up existentially alone. Right. And so I might share that. And then I would say a prayer. I would say, okay, God, thank you so much for the opportunity to stretch myself out of my comfort zone. Thank you so much for the gift of this person asking me to do something and for the strength to say no. I realize that is a sign of my recovery because I was never able to do that before. So God, thank you for the opportunities to grow. Please bless this person and change me. Amen. Or something like that. Right. And then that's my 10th step. And then, maybe I'll pray for someone else, or maybe I'll make an outreach call to a newcomer. Or yesterday in particular, I was talking to my sponsee a little bit after I did that 10 steps. So I just, kind of rolled that into my turning my attention to someone I can help. But that would be how I do a 10 step.
Love it. Thank you for walking through that. That's very helpful. And I love hearing how you basically turned it into a mini step 4 for that one thing, and very thorough. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. So once again, reminder to our audience, if you have a question for Dara, type it in the Q&A. I've got several here that I'd like to go through, as many as we can get to in the next 20, 25 minutes. All right. So early on in your share, Dara, you mentioned the importance of seeing the order of seeing internal and external unmanageabilities. What is making me want to fill this hole in my soul with that? Why is it important to understand the difference of the order of those unmanageabilities for somebody who's, walking in and trying out this recovery thing for the first time?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. So I previously thought, and it says, that addicts were the victims of the delusion that, if our lives would be great if we could only manage well or something. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but so what I thought was, well, if I get the great job, if I get the perfect body, if I get the perfect boyfriend or girlfriend, then I'll be happy, right? Like that was my inner narrative. And so what would happen for me was that I would get the things that I wanted and I would still feel empty on the inside. And that was really, really hard, or I would think, well, the 10th step example, see, I would only be happy if this person would stop asking me to do stuff for them. Like then I would be happy. And the problem with that is that actually, and I know we focus a lot on powerlessness in this program, and step 1 is all about powerlessness. But the rest of the steps are actually about becoming empowered, is at least my understanding of that, and getting access to this source of power that will show me how to be free no matter what is going on outside of me, no matter what is happening in my life. And it is very disempowering if I need to wait for outcomes to change in order to be okay on the inside versus being able to be okay on the inside regardless of what is happening around me. And so for me, I think a huge lie that it set me up for so much pain was thinking that, my inner condition, my peace, my happiness, my joy, my ability to love myself had to do with, all the things that I was going to acquire or the circumstances that I was going to create. And then when I couldn't get people to cooperate, or I couldn't get what I wanted, or I did get what I wanted and it didn't fill the void, I was miserable. And I couldn't figure out why I was miserable. And I kept thinking, well, if I just strive harder, if I just get a different job, if I just get a different boyfriend, if I just, all that stuff. So I think it's important to understand that the outside stuff is not going to fill the inner void, because if I don't understand that, then I'm working towards the wrong things. I keep striving harder for a better job when really all I need is to invite God into my life. And then maybe a better job will come along. Maybe not. Maybe I'll like the job I have better. I don't know. But it says, the big book talks about how, first we straighten out spiritually, then mentally, then physically. And I always wanted to change things physically, then mentally, then spiritually. And it never worked that way.
I love that order that you brought in there. I've always wanted to change the physical aspect of things first too. And it never works. Never works. Not the capital S solution. All right. You mentioned a little bit about the term terminal uniqueness. And I hear this a lot in speaker meetings in different rooms. And whether they use the word terminal uniqueness or I'm just different than you guys. I don't know. This just won't work for me. How do you come to the solution of that terminal uniqueness that you or I are really no different than any of the other bozos that are riding on this bus along with us?
Well, I think, the primary requirement to get recovery is honesty. That's the price of admission. And when I felt terminally unique, much of it was because I wasn't actually telling the truth about myself. So other people couldn't get to know me and say, me too, right? And this whole program is a program of identification. And so I think the reason I felt so different was because I wasn't actually letting people know how I felt, the things I did. All of it was held so deeply inside because of shame or whatever, or superiority, that I was gonna feel different. And because I really think the source of this problem is spiritual separation, that's where the terminal thing comes in. Because when I feel different and apart from, I get pretty self-destructive pretty quickly, and I'm gonna kill myself. So I think how I've dealt with the feeling of uniqueness is things like giving away a fourth step, is sponsoring people, is, making outreach calls, or, doing service in meetings. Because the more that I hear people who are like me, the more I'm like, oh yeah, me too. And the more I share authentically the wild and crazy stuff that goes on between my ears, and people laugh at me, or smile, or say like, yeah, I felt that way, or like, that just happened to me yesterday, or whatever it is, then the less alone I feel. And so I think it's a counterintuitive thing for an addict, right? Where it's like, oh, I gotta hide all these unlovable things about me, is how I felt. But really it's no, the more I expose the things about me that I think are unlovable, the more love I'm going to be able to let in.
Yeah. It reminds me of the phrase, I'm only as sick as my secrets. When I have no more secrets, I can be well, I can be comfortable around the people that know, the deep darkness and have also likely been in that same or very similar deep darkness and can understand that. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned, and you kind of referenced this here when you just shared, but also earlier you mentioned about that the issue it's a spiritual issue. It's being blocked from God. Something's blocking me from God. How do you go about identifying when there is something blocking you from God? vulnerability over the last handful of days, I have felt absolutely blocked from God, and I've really had no desire to break down that block. But I understand the disaster that's awaiting me if I don't recognize it. So how do you go about identifying it and then being willing to move through it?
Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you for that question. And I will say that I guess for me, there's two possibilities. So one is the things that can block me from God are either like the active addiction or an active addiction, I think, right? Like it's a substance-based or behavior-based problem, or it's a character defect. And I think one thing that I got into a lot of trouble with in the past, Justin, was I kept trying to treat an addiction like a character defect. And what I mean by that is acting out in my sex and love addiction, but going to OA meetings and sponsoring an OA, I would call my sponsor and I would say, I cheated on myself all the harder into helping others, and do a 10-step on it and whatever. And for me to block in either case has to do with turning my attention to the steps. But if what I'm doing that's blocking me from God or the thing that's getting in the way is about me being an active addiction, I have to really stop that before the steps are going to be able to soak within my soul. So having said that, today, when I realize that there's something that's blocking me from God, the way that I identify it is because my default position right now is one of love, like for God and myself. And if I don't feel, and I'm working on it with other people, it's like 70-30, like sometimes I'm not always super loving to other people, but if I feel like I don't really love myself, or I'm praying and I don't really feel super connected to God, for me today, because I don't have anything to take the edge off, that is a very uncomfortable feeling. I don't like that feeling. I've become a spiritual junkie the same way I was once a food junkie. And so I do like always want that high, I'm always seeking a high. And for me today, I get high from God. So there's a ton of incentive because I'm not doing things that really block me. But like, for example, I noticed that I was checking my email too much or checking my text messages too much. And I felt like that was kind of blocking me from God. And so now what I'll do is, I might send a text message to my sponsor and be like, hey, I'm not going to check email until after 7:00 tonight, like just committing to that or whatever. So I'll invite people in if it's something that feels like it's a compulsion that gets kind of kicked up. But beyond that, I just do a lot of like prayer, meditation, two-way prayer. I pray looking in my own eyes in the mirror and like really try to connect with the God force within. And so, yeah, there's a lot of like spiritual disciplines that I do to get connected. And I would say that my level of, it's not even a level of willingness, it's a need, because I know that I am incapable of moving through life without worshiping something. And I just know that if it's not going to be God, then it's going to be something else that could be really destructive. So I don't know if that's helpful or if that even fully answered your question, but yeah, I would just say the main thing I want to say about that is that for me, character defects are slightly different than like behavioral stuff. And so I have different approaches depending on what's going on.
Yeah, thank you so much. It gave me several things to think about and practices. In fact, the praying while looking yourself in the eye in the mirror, that's something that just, kind of kicked me in the head. I know that for many people, myself included, early in recovery and in addiction, I could not look myself in the eye in the mirror. I hated myself. Why would I look myself in the eye in the mirror? How did you get to the point where you were comfortable doing that so that you could do, something as intimate as prayer while looking yourself in the eye in the mirror?
Yeah. So I hated myself too. So I don't know any addicts that are like, I love myself. And, here I am. But I will say I wasn't comfortable with it at first, but I did it because my sponsor in SLAA said it had been helpful for her. And she asked me if I would commit to doing it twice a day for 2 weeks. And I did. And the first few times I was like, oh, this is really weird. And I felt very soulless, but now it's become, I don't still do it twice a day. I still pray twice a day, just once looking in my own eyes. But it's become like, if I ever miss a day or I do it kind of later in the day, I feel unsettled. It's like, I want to connect with the God force within. I really believe that if God is in me and I have access to that, I'm not going to self-destruct. And so it's become something that is like really great and beautiful, and I love it. But I did feel uncomfortable doing it at first, the same way I felt uncomfortable measuring my food or telling someone what I was going to eat or having a dating plan. Like everything in recovery that I started to do, I was very uncomfortable doing when I started it, but now it's become more and more integrated into my life.
Thank you for sharing that, Dara. All right, got another couple questions here, and a reminder to our live audience, if you have a question for Dara, please type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of the window. One of the final questions I have for you, Dara, you mentioned, and I love this, and so I want to get your take, as many takes on this as I can from as many different people as I can. When you recognize that your acting out, your eating, your sex and love wasn't the problem, but it was a small s solution to the problem that was there, the God-sized hole in your soul. Why is that so important to recognize that the problem isn't the problem? The solution that I've used up to this point is the problem.
Yeah. So my experience with that, and I love that question, is that if food is the problem, well, then the second I stop eating compulsively, then I'm good. I don't need this anymore. Right. And if sex and love addiction, like active sex and love addiction, is the problem, then the minute I stop compulsively dating or cheating or whatever, like then I don't need this program anymore. And so for me, recognizing that the solution is actually spiritual separation, I am going to need for the rest of my life a way to connect to God, day in and day out. And so I think for me, what it's done is it's incentivized me to stay. It's incentivized me to want to continue to do the work. It's incentivized me to realize that a level of life and fulfillment that I never knew possible. I kind of feel like it's the difference between, they talk about in the big book, like being rocketed into the fourth dimension, which is that spiritual dimension. And I think it, to your point earlier about kind of looking at the physical, I kept trying to live to fix the physical to have a spiritual experience, and it was never going to happen. And so I think for me, really recognizing that the problem, it's twofold, right? So if I'm continuing to act out in any way, or I'm continuing to eat foods that block me from God, I'm never going to get access to that spiritual solution. So I have to first be willing to be abstinent. I have to first be willing to be sober. But after that, sobriety in and of itself, abstinence in and of itself is not enough, because I'm not going to be able to, that isn't going to help me access God. I have to be willing to walk the rest of the steps, and I have to continue to walk them if I want to continue to deepen my relationship with that power.
Excellent. Thank you. And the last question I have before we wrap this up is that you mentioned that you said this, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I couldn't write it fast enough. I can't be pursuing love of myself at the same time I am pursuing love from someone else. If you wouldn't mind, dig there a little bit. What does that mean to you, and how can that be applied into recovery?
Yeah. And I love that you asked that. So that was certainly true for me before I acquired any self-love, because I hated myself, like hated myself. And because I hated myself, I was willing to become anyone just to get someone else to quote unquote love me. So that meant that I would lie to get people to love me. I would cheat. I would manipulate. I had like no values or moral standards or compass for like my own behavior and what was right and good for me. And so I was so willing to sacrifice myself and to sacrifice, what I really wanted, because I just hated myself so much. And so because of that, I think if I were to have tried to pursue a relationship with someone else when I wasn't really in a solid, committed relationship with myself, it didn't work, and it wasn't sustainable. And in fact, I had met some nice people, but I wasn't attracted to nice people because I hated myself. So I was only attracted to people who were very destructive, because that's what I thought I, deserved. And so I think for me now, like I can honestly say that I love myself today and I love God, and that those are the primary relationships in my life, or my relationship with God and with myself, which means that I am currently dating, and like I am willing to let go of any relationship that gets in the way of my relationship to myself and my relationship with God. And so that gives me a level of freedom that I never had before in active sex and love addiction. And so I think, now, like, I can pursue a love relationship with someone else, and I am doing that, but it's not to fill any sort of void. It's almost like anything else in recovery. Like, I have goals, I have dreams, I have aspirations, but none of it means more to me than me or than God.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dara. Do you have any final words of wisdom before we go into the closing readings and close this down?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I have any words of wisdom at all. But I just want to say, like, so lately I've been talking to a lot of people who've been in relapse or coming back from relapse, or, who haven't yet kind of gotten recovery. And often, they'll feel so unlovable or so tortured or so, empty on the inside. And I just think, that, so my experience is that God wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. And if I'm not those things, then it's just evidence of my addiction coming up, like any other illness, right? If someone had cancer, if someone had diabetes, if someone had whatever, it's like, okay, well, yeah, you've got this illness. So what's the treatment? Let's live in the solution. Let's figure out, what it is, and let's, get well. And so I have a spiritual illness, and the symptoms are that I get very angry, I get very sad, I get very depressed, I get, when I'm not treated. And so I guess I just want to offer for people that if they're struggling, or they feel alone, or they feel, like there's something wrong with them, or they're spiritually bankrupt, like, it's just evidence that, yeah, like, you've got the same disease that I have. And, I hope you'll keep searching for the treatment that's going to work for you, whoever you are, because it's not, things that I thought were me really weren't me. They were the disease. And I think that's really hard for me, that was hard to understand when I had like spiritual schizophrenia, and I had the disease was talking to me in my own voice, and it sounded very true, and I believed it. But today, looking back, I realized that so much of what I believed was a lie. And I've seen that happen over and over and over again in other people. And so for anyone who is struggling listening to this, I think just if they can believe a little more in recovery than they do in the lies of their disease, I think they've got a fighting chance.
Awesome. Thanks again, Dara. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those working and wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to RECO12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up. I invite our audience to come back next week. Actually, next week, I am taking the week off. It's my grandmother's 90th birthday, and I'm going to go spend time with extended family for the first time in many years. And so I'm going to put up a recording of an old episode next week at about the same time, about noon Central Time. It'll be scheduled to go up, and we'll go with that. But if you have not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way to work your 12th step and sharing this message with others. Like I mentioned, I won't be here next week, but in 2 weeks, we'll be back, and we'll be hearing from a great speaker. And I did not write down her name. Christine is her name, and we're excited to hear from her. And that'll be on February 4th. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with a prayer from the heart that Dara wants to offer.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. God, Goddess, Godex, Spirit of light and love, whatever is up there, out there, in me and in all others, please, please, please give us all the strength and the courage, God, to meet you where we are, as we are, so that we may know your love and forgiveness and compassion and hope, and so that we might come to see ourselves the way that you see us, as your children, your spouses, your partners, your friends. God, please give each and every one of us a deepened experience of you. Amen.
Amen. Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and binded with the seal.